Welcome to How to Become TV. My name is Jace, and this is how wannabe coders become pro. I am pumped again this week because just by chance, not by chance, I have secretly been stalking Patrick for a little while.
That's all right.
But I have a former Google employee who was hired there, and he eventually left to start his own successful software as a service company. For those of you who don't know what that is, we're going to get into that. But he is all about pricing. Now, he started at Google as a business strategist. We're going to talk about his background and history. But he actually hires developers on a regular basis, and the man was hired by Google. And I have spoken to people who have been hired by Google, but they would not speak on camera. They would not let me quote them. And sometimes I couldn't even capture them on camera. So this is an accomplishment that I'm going to take credit for. I'm really grateful that Patrick is with us today. Thank you for joining us, Patrick Campbell. He's the CEO of Price Intelligently. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm more than happy to chat about the big colorful box known as Google. So
That's great.
hopefully,
Really glad to have you. I know there are a lot of hardcore members of this audience that would just give their left leg to work at Google and any of the big four. They just like some inside information about what that process was like, what kind of they just don't want to hear from a career coach anymore. They want to hear from people who actually did it. So that's great. So just tell us, how did you just give some background here. Last week we spoke to Kevin Key, and Kevin is a successful software developer that really went up the technical stream. He hasn't done any team leads, no project management, nothing like that. He really went up the technical side exclusively. And hello, welcome.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you? I know Patrick. I just saw him on Twitter, so.
Oh, you know Patrick. All right. What's your name?
I'm Ryan.
Ryan. Welcome, Ryan.
Well, I don't want to interrupt.
No problem. We'll just continue. If you got questions or comments, Ryan, you just you jump in the appropriate time. But in this case, Patrick Campbell, although he does have some training in computer science engineering, he really went up the business strategy route. So, and he's now the CEO of his own SaaS company, and he's hiring developers. So, hey, here's your chance.
always
Here's your
hiring.
chance to speak to a man who needs good quality developers. So thank you very much. Can I just ask you, how did you start in this industry and why?
Yeah, so I'll first start off by just kind of talking about my experience at Google, and then a little bit about the job process, because I know that's something bigger, and then I will kind of transition to how I got to Price Intelligently. But initially, with Google, I just started off by applying directly through the website, and I got really I beat the algorithm with my resume. I got really lucky. Most people do find someone to refer them, whether it's an alumni or alumnus of their college, or family friends. Even finding people on LinkedIn, because there's a big fat referral bonus for Googlers who bring in more Googlers. But then I went through the interview process. It was a series of 4 interviews, pretty intense here and there. I can get more into specifics on some of the questions. I know that they've changed, and it's different for how you come into each of the different organizations at Google. But while I was at Google, I actually ended up utilizing one of their big benefits to go back to school to learn to code. And I wouldn't say I am full-fledged developer, software tech head like you had last week, but I would say that I can hack my way through something, a nice MVP, or at least, know how to communicate with, product and software devs, and look for, certain things to hire those individuals. So I started, hacking on some projects that I was, very, very blessed to be able to scale across, Google, especially within their sales teams. And then, from there, I got the itch to kind of get into a smaller company. I actually left Google to work for a Boston-based startup called Gemvara, where I did strategic initiatives. So it was kind of like a random hazard man, I like to say, where I was able to use my coding background, my ecom background, and kind of a mix of different skills to work on different critical business needs. And then I made the jump to my own business after noticing just how powerful pricing software could be to the SaaS industry. And that's kind of the nutshell 60-second journey that I've had over the past few years. And I would say, just to summarize, one big thing that I learned throughout the process is that really knowing your stuff, and that doesn't necessarily mean like having real deep knowledge on one thing, but it does mean like knowing what you need to know and knowing the resources that you need to access to get there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that summary. I appreciate that. Now, can I just start at the beginning here? And so dig down deep into actually applying to Google. You applied online. And I know I've interviewed HR software professionals that talked about keywords. How did you apply online? I mean, if you didn't have a referral, so you didn't have a buddy who was working at Google,
Yeah.
That's hard, right?
Yeah.
I know you had your degree in rhetoric and economy, right?
Yeah, economics. Yep.
How did you stand out in that process of applying online alone?
So I don't know directly about the algorithm and how you sneak through. I do know kind of best practices that they look for in screening. Competitiveness of where you go to school is weighed against kind of how well your GPA is. So they get thousands of applications a day. And so they do need to kind of pare them down. And I was very fortunate I didn't really go to, an elite school, but I had a really good, GPA and really good scores. But on top,
can I just interrupt you there for a second? For
Sure.
the non-American audience, the GPA is his grade point average.
Yep.
That's his marks that he got. Sorry, continue, Patrick.
Yeah, my marks. That makes sense. But on top of that, and I just want to kind of provide a prologue to that here is that you don't necessarily need perfect marks or excellent grades. The big thing is to kind of differentiate yourself and make yourself as unique as possible to other applicants to Google. So they have there's marathon runners, there's people who have gone off and cured cancer. There's all, I mean, I'm being exaggerating, of course, but there's a lot of individuals who even just put down the service that they did in school or the service they do outside of their work that really gets them noticed. For developers, open source projects that you do, even if they're not something that's scaled out to thousands of users, but just little fun projects that you do can get you a long way, especially if they're quirky and cool. I would think about the things that make you you, and then kind of leverage those within your application. Um,
Hello, can you hear me now, guys?
I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
sorry. Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead. I don't
Oh,
know how
sorry
it
about
happened.
that.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I don't know. As I was saying, find what makes you unique, and then kind of amplify that within your application and your cover letter. And for software developers, to summarize, really leverage the open source stuff you did, or even fun apps that you did, in school or in the way that you learn and develop.
Hi, John. How are
What's
you?
up? Great.
How you doing?
Awesome. How are you?
Good. Do you know this guy?
Right. Oh, this guy. No, I don't.
Anybody? You don't know anybody? Okay. Well, it's good. Thanks for joining us. This is good. I've been trying hard to get people to join us live. If you guys have questions, jump in.
Oh, of course I know. Okay. No, I know him. I know him.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't understand who was talking there. I thought he was talking.
No. So can I just summarize briefly, Patrick? So what we're
Sure.
talking about, it's not just one thing. Being a Harvard grad isn't necessarily going to guarantee it. Having built an application before isn't necessarily going to guarantee it. But you need something to distinguish yourself from the masses, whether that's some sort of accomplishment outside of work, like a marathon, volunteering. You need something to distinguish yourself, and you need to go prepared in that manner. Would that be fair to say?
Definitely, definitely. I think, and it doesn't have to be huge, but just have something that you can talk to that, differentiates you, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go to the next step. So you somehow got contacted. How did they contact you by email, by phone? How did that happen?
I think the initial contact was by email, and then it was to set up phone interviews. And I got on the initial phone screens. Yeah, so they do two phone screens, and then they do two in-person interviews. For developers, it's a lot different. Developers, you may have up to seven interviews depending on the role that you're applying for. Um, but overall it's going to be a longer haul because culture is a huge thing for Google. um, and it's not something you should fear, like, oh, am I a cultural fit or not, but it is something that you should be prepared for them to vet you on. Are you going to fit into the the Google lifestyle, which is fun, very anti-corporate, bureaucracy. But yeah, so I got the phone screen. The phone screens were, um, pretty intense, and then the in-person interviews were also pretty intense.
What do you mean by
Um,
pretty intense? What do you mean intense?
so it's not like a typical job interview where you go and they say tell me three strengths or tell me three weaknesses. It's very there's you can search Google for different Google interview questions, but they do ask you some questions that really dig deep into something. So like let's say you have you had a job at or rather let's say it like this. They're going to ask you something like tell me about a time that you did X, Y, or Z. And X, Y, or Z could be, that you built something and then scaled it out. Whether that's, you built a team project and scaled it, to your class, or it's, you volunteered somewhere, or you built an actual application. But after your answer, what they'll do is they'll drill down into every single detail until it's almost you've exhausted anything you can talk about that particular topic. And so that can get a little bit frustrating because you're like, okay, I just explained everything and now you want to know more. Oh, I explained more, now they want to know more. Other kind of intense things that you need to be prepared for is they're going to ask you like a question, a logic type question, where it's going to be like, so, um, you know, the question I got involved, it was how many at like a stadium, how many quarters were in that stadium, like physical coins in a full stadium. Other questions are like how many golf balls can you fit in a school bus, things like that, that at first glance you're like, what kind of question is this? But then as you kind of go through the process, they just want to see you like think through the problem and come up with some answer. It doesn't have to be perfect. So those types of questions are normal. They're more the norm than typical interviews.
Awesome. Now, I had done some research on before, and one of the most famous questions that comes up is the whole blender question.
Yeah.
If you were the size of a pencil and in a blender, did they ask that question?
Not for me, but I've definitely heard some pretty unique answers, and that's really, they're looking for your creativity. They're looking for you to think outside the box, because you're going to be faced with some bigger problems or just some opportunities at the company, and they just want you to be able to think through them essentially.
Man, it's a party time tonight. That's great.
It's the power of Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter. Well, I have quite a few followers. I have more followers than you do, and you brought in a lot more. That's good. That's good.
These are my
Hi guys,
homies.
welcome. So, do you guys? It seems like you all know Patrick. That's good. Do you guys got any questions for Patrick? He was just finishing the his first phone screen interviews for his interviews at Google. You guys wanted any ask any questions that pertain to the interview process at Google? Now would be the time.
I have one quick question. So I read online, I think today or yesterday, I think it was in Boston, that Google is one of the top 10 companies hiring in Boston right now. Maybe this is me being like not being as aware as I should be, but I didn't even realize that Google really had a presence in Boston.
Yeah, they have a huge presence. Or What's your question though? Or is that
So
kind
yeah,
of?
I mean, I was wondering if you could just talk to like Google in Boston. I mean, I know
Yeah.
they have a new space over by Kendall. I think I read like last spring, but
Yeah.
I don't think I've met anyone who's at Google right now who lives in Boston.
Cool. So actually, that's why when I moved to Boston, that's where I was working at the same space they are in Kendall. When I started there, there was about 350 people there. Um, and Google's presence has increased pretty dramatically in Boston, mainly through the ITA acquisition. So they bought ITA, which is a travel software company, which was 1,000 people when they bought it. So it effectively doubled the size of the Google office instantly. And then they bought this new building or rented out this new building, which you heard about, the last couple of
Yeah,
months. And now they're trying to ramp it up because, they have this critical mass of people in Boston with all the universities around here. It's kind of ripe for young talent. Um, so in Boston, the particular groups that are here are sales, online sales in terms of, Google AdWords. There's some, bigger market sales as well. And then there's all kinds of different engineering groups. There's Books, Google Search. Trying to think of a couple other ones. Obviously, ITA is here now through that acquisition. There's some YouTube dev. There's some who else here? There's a little bit of like some marketing teams. Marketing isn't as big here. They like to have that kind of towards the mothership in Boston or in Mountain View. But yeah, their presence is pretty large here, and it kind of offsets the Microsoft presence in Boston.
yeah. So I guess then from there, so they have such a presence in Boston. Say for like, Ryan, Jack, and I are all around the same age. Would you recommend like a 21, 22-year-old founding a company if they think they have a good opportunity up their sleeve, or going to work somewhere like Google, which is a lot bigger, obviously what you opted to do? What do you think in retrospect? Obviously, you have a company now.
Um, I think there's a lot of power in the Google brand for having that on your resume.
Yeah,
But I think that for you guys, I know each of you are pretty involved within the startup community. I think you're going to get more benefit out of working for a startup because you're going to get a nice early stage position at a startup.
right.
Uh, you know, it is easier though, I would say, to go from big company to startup than it is to go from startup to big company. And that's not like from an aptitude standpoint. That's just from a like your culture standpoint. At a
Or
small, go ahead.
even from our case, it's like I'm asking like, so for us, it's like nothing to startup or nothing to big company. Because like,
Yeah.
what have we done so far?
Um, I would say, if you can get in at Google, like go there for a year, see the experience, and then decide if you want to make the leap. But I will say though that at a startup you're going to learn a hell of a lot more about running a
Yeah,
business than you are at Google. Google you're going to learn like just some sweet like stuff, and like how to run like a nice big business. Um, but the learning curve isn't as steep, I would say. So I would
right.
definitely weigh those costs and benefits.
Awesome, thank you.
I'd be staying for the free haircuts.
Nice.
Yeah,
The free food is great.
I can
Definitely great.
imagine. I can imagine. All right. So also, guys, you have the lower third option. If you look up at the top left-hand corner of your Google Hangout, you can add a lower third if you want to put a link or a Twitter handle right there. We have about 15,000 uniques per month that can see that if you want. That's no problem. So Ryan, go to the next stage. So you made it past 2 phone screens, correct? What was the
Yeah.
next step?
Then they fly you out to wherever the group that is going to interview you is. Um, so in my case, I headed to Boston. I interviewed in Boston, and the in-person interviews were along the same lines of the phone screens, but they were they had a similar like drill down type of interview, and then they had another interview that was more like get to know you, which was great, because that allowed you to kind of relax a little bit, but then you were kind of thinking, wait, what are they looking for? And as a result, it was more of the cultural interview. Was that fourth interview?
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. So how did you prepare for those interviews? What kind of research or prep did you do?
I researched the role and I researched the business model that I would be working with. That was, particularly important to do, mainly because, they ask you questions about like, how would you explain Google to a 4-year-old, or how would you explain, Google AdWords to a business, or, a lot of different like a lot of different things that, if you don't know the answer, in general, you're not going to be successful, in answering kind of the more specific question. Additionally, I just did research on, applying to Google and like asking or answering questions in a Google interview. There's a lot of resources online already. I would say for the development side, really brush up on the code base and the different, software requirements that were listed in the job description, because the developer interviews are pretty intense. Like they're going to physically ask you to, build a dictionary that can scale to 1 million users, or, do a number of different things in code. Like you won't necessarily have to get in the command line and, build it out, but you will have to, whiteboard it. And, just a quick piece of advice for developers too is that they'll get you to a point where they're going to ask you questions that you just don't know the answer to. And it's not because you're a bad developer. It's just because you're dealing with the guy who invented Java, or like invented, Python or something like that. So they're obviously much, smarter than you in terms of that code base, or they've been using, the code base since it existed. So in that case, don't necessarily get frustrated, but, be humble about, okay, well, I'm not really sure about the specific answer, but this is how I would approach trying to figure it out. And then following the interview that same day, I would research the actual answer and then send the answer off to them, because they really, really appreciate, finding someone who who doesn't necessarily know the answers, but who can figure out how to find the answers.
Awesome. So is part of this the need or the tendency for Google to push and see at which point you may break or fold in the interview? Like they want to push you past the point of what you do know. So do you start making up answers? Do you start lying, or do you try and come up with creative solutions, or are you honest?
No, I would be
Is that part of the issue?
Yeah, don't lie. They'll know. I mean, like you can't really, BS, like I said, the guy who invented Java who's interviewing you, or, the person who was employee number 3 at Android, because those will be the people who are interviewing you, at least for part of the interview process. So I would admit when you don't know something, but don't just give up. Like try and, follow a few different paths to figuring out the answer. And if you can't, just be like, you know what, I would need to think a little bit more about it. There's a way of saying I don't know without being like I have no idea.
Awesome. I think we lost Ryan on the bat phone. He got called on the bat phone. I think he's gone to do something. He's left a mannequin in his place. I really like the bat phone thing. Bring that back.
Yeah.
All right, Patrick, that's great. Thank you. So you said you had 2 phone screenings, and then how many in-person interviews did you have?
There were 2, and they were handled on the same day. Developers, you can have, like I said, a full day of interviews with many different people. If it's a more senior role, they'll more than likely fly you out or have you stay a couple of days. But it really depends on the role.
Were you able to research the interviewee, the person who was going to interview you? Did you have searched their name on LinkedIn or Googled their name? Did you know who was going to interview you in a face-to-face interview?
I believe I knew the first name. I don't know if I knew the full name. So that's, yeah, so I can't really definitively say if I knew who they were, but I think I'm sorry, I don't know. I can't remember.
No problem. Yep. So if you could go back and do it again, how would you prepare even better than you did? What would you have done?
I would have learned more about the actual business model of Google. because I didn't like I knew kind of about AdWords and AdSense, but I really didn't research how Google made money as well as I probably should have before the interview. Um, Additionally, I probably would have gone through a couple of mock interviews. I didn't really do that as well as I should have, but that would have truly prepared me for going into the trenches, we'll say, of a high pressure Google interview.
Good stuff. Thank you. Any more about the Google interviews that you wanted to add that hasn't been said yet?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think you just need to approach it not as a typical interview and you'll be fine. The people who don't do well, they approach it like any other interview and then they end up, crashing and burning.
Okay, so one more question about actual Google, and then I want to move on to what you're doing now, because you're doing some really exciting stuff now. But we constantly hear about, and you referred to it here, Google's culture, the cultural fit, the culture of Google. What was the culture of Google, and how is that different from, other IT jobs that a lot of our audience would be accustomed to?
Think about Apple, and then think about everything as the opposite. No, I'm semi kidding. No, I mean, openness is huge. Navigating ambiguity is huge. There's a whole list of things that are big to Google's culture, but I would say like the big things that resonated with me was navigating ambiguity. Making sure that you collaborate. Teamwork and collaboration is huge. And then also, being direct and honest and eliminating as much bureaucracy as possible. So any way that you can show those features of you, I think are going to be huge within an interview, especially for developers, because you're going to be working in teams. They try to create as close to a startup style in each development group. It's really hard because there's like 20,000 people working there now. But they want scrappy individuals who can navigate different problems and figure out the answers as quickly as possible.
So when you say navigating ambiguity, you mean people who are creative, had a lot of self-starters. They may not have the clearest structured framework, but they know the end result in mind, and they're just plodding forward, trying to find creative solutions to these problems. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that that's accurate. Think of it this way: like if I, gave you a problem to solve and didn't give you a lot of direction, then Google would want you to figure out that problem, in as efficiently as a manner as possible. And that's kind of the approach that you should take. And I would say kind of extrapolate that advice to the startup world or any software job. Like you're going to be given problems or goals, and you need to figure out how to get to those goals or to get to those answers by yourself, essentially.
Good stuff. Okay. So now you spent just over a year at Google. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
And again, you were doing the business strategy side specifically with AdWords. And I read on LinkedIn you got some great referrals from Google. So obviously they were really happy with you. But you had the itch. You had the startup itch.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to move on to a startup that basically was a software as a service? And when you're at it, can you explain for the audience what a software as a service is as opposed to shrink wrap software?
Yeah. So so I didn't go directly to software. I went to another venture-backed startup, but I got the itch to move to a startup mainly because I saw things that I was creating or that I was involved with on a team, and I saw them getting hung up because of different bureaucracy that popped up. It's a 20,000 person company, so there's a lot of different priorities to manage, and I didn't necessarily like that. Some of the ideas that my team or myself saw as advantageous weren't able to kind of put the pedal to the metal per se. So that's kind of why I made the leap. And plus I started seeing a goal of owning and running my own company or being involved in an early stage startup. and I wasn't going to get those skills from, even working at Google and going to events or classes. I needed to actually be more in the thick of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I made the leap to Gemvara, which is a e-commerce site. They do customizable jewelry, and there's about 50 people there now. There's about 75 since I've left, and it was definitely a huge change, because now you went through a company with just a ton of cash, and all the resources in the world essentially, and all the data in the world, to a company that had venture funding, but was still kind of scrappy, because you're not going to spend cash on needless things. And then after Gemvara, I made the leap finally to kind of starting my own business with a couple of co-founders, and it was definitely adrenaline rush. And the reason for that was I felt that my learning curve at Gemvara I hadn't learned everything. There was a ton more that I could learn, but I wasn't learning as quickly as I was in the beginning. And I wanted to leap into another situation where all of a sudden I was learning at a breakneck speed, and drinking water from a fire hose, to kind of bring a metaphor into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
So at Price Intelligently, so software as a service, just to kind of explain, is a method of administering software on a subscription basis. So it's completely cloud based. It allows you to use the software without downloading on your computer, having your own, space, dedicated, on, servers, hard drives, all that fun stuff. And it's, truly a scalable business. So anyone who's, wants to develop software, there are instances where, shrink wrap software is, still a viable model, but everything's going towards SaaS, because the unit economics of SaaS are really, really advantageous. Because you can truly scale out users at a lower cost and a much average revenue per user ARPU than you can for software or a brick and mortar type retailer, or even an e-tailer.
Then let me ask you a question, Patrick.
Sure.
One of the reasons I found Price Intelligently was through research I was doing on Dev Bootcamp and the Starter League. These are hacker schools that take you for 3 or 4 months at a time. You take experienced hackers or complete noobs and teach them usually Ruby or Ruby on Rails. Is one of your co-founders a grad of one of those hacker schools?
No, they might be a mentor of one of those hacker schools. So Aaron White is, he's a pretty big technologist in the Boston area and, outside of Boston. He's best known for developing really popular Twitter apps that get shut down. So he developed something
The Twitter API.
Yeah, he developed something called Proxlet that allowed you, I'm probably getting it wrong, but Proxlet allowed you to,
Hi, John.
hey, John. Proxlet allowed you to basically filter out a lot of the noise on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then he developed something else that was called Tweet Favor, which allowed you to send an email to your friends to get kind of a pledge for a tweet, and then it allowed you to administer that tweet live whenever you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 really popular apps that kind of started getting a lot of users quickly, that Twitter decided violated their terms of service, which in retrospect they kind of did, but it was arguable how they handled the situation. They didn't give any warning. So yeah, he's a pretty big technologist who's kind of developed some pretty cool open source projects as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he might be a mentor at one of those 2 dev boot camps.
Okay, so guys, I know there's some people here, and I want to hear your questions. So we're going to go through Price Intelligently for a few minutes. If you can just keep your questions ready. Once he's done there, we can fire any questions at him. I muted people because we're getting some audio spillover, and it was getting hard to hear Patrick. So Patrick, Price Intelligently. Yeah, I looked at it. I looked at your blog post. You had a fantastic blog post about the freemium business model.
Yeah.
And I read, for those of you who don't know what freemium is, it's a fantastic concept of you have a free product, you get a lot of users with the free product, and you get a very small percentage of your audience to pay for a premium version of that free product. And it's been extremely successful for many companies, Google being one of them. but there's some very popular books by a Wired's editor called Free. It's all about the freemium model. It's a fantastic book. But Patrick put up a blog post that was really was an anti-freemium model, but he talks about the downsides of the freemium model in a really intelligent way. So I thought, wow, this guy's really smart, and I had never seen someone take the pricing issue and put it into a SaaS service. There's books, there's consultants out there, but I'd never seen it into a SaaS service. So I wanted to hear why you thought of that, why would it work, and what were some of the struggles and victories that you've had along the way?
So, can you summarize that question for me?
Sorry, it was a long-winded one.
Yeah, there's a lot of twists.
What made you think that was a viable option?
To what? Pricing?
To create a software as a service that see when I read it, because when I first looked at it, I'm like, how would that work? Don't you isn't that like by a case basis? How do you get a software to decide how to price my product intelligently?
Okay.
Wouldn't you have to meet for over a number of weeks? You get to know my product and know my audience before you, as the pricing expert, can decide how I should price my product. I mean, I thought that's how it worked. And I read your blog post and I thought, this guy's got a lot more going on in the brain than I thought.
Yeah.
So why software as opposed to a consulting service?
So software, the reason we chose software is because the pricing industry right now, and this is kind of like a lot of industries and why all of a sudden you'll see a software platform pop up for a particular industry, is because it's controlled a lot by consultants that, in all honesty, they charge a hell of a lot of money for a really pretty PowerPoint deck that doesn't necessarily provide a lot of actual data to help a pricing decision. And that's a little pejorative, I'll admit it, and a little exaggerating. But at the end of the day, they're really expensive, they're inefficient, they take a long time, and they cost a lot of money and a lot of runway. So the idea was, okay, so how can we take what some really, really good consultants are doing, or some really, really good economic models that help with pricing, and how can we productize it in a way that we can sell software off the shelf to help someone, price their products from a willingness to pay perspective. So actually going after what a customer is willing to spend and the value that they find in a product, rather than, well, I think they'll pay this, or, my competitor's charging this, so I should probably charge this. That's kind of the tack that we took on it. I won't say that it's, absolutely touchless at this point, where you put in a number and it spits back out what your price should be. It still does require some work and some setup on your end, but it's getting you closer and closer to what we like to call do-it-yourself pricing, where you can spend a hell of a lot of less money and get much better data and best practices for your dollar, and get a really, really good price that captures all the cash that you're leaving on the table.
Okay, so could I say that Price Intelligently takes empirical data-based evidence to make pricing choices rather than going by intuition and gut feel and what your competitors do?
Yep. So we take an empirical approach to pricing rather than gut feelings and competitors, which are essentially gut feelings. So yeah, that's accurate to say.
I'm going to price my book at $14.95 because my competitor has a book at $14.95.
Yeah.
Not necessarily intelligent. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. So some crisis, some nightmares in either hiring developers, in creating the code yourself. What were some of the trials and tribulations they had to overcome to do it? Because it looks fantastic now. I'm sure it didn't start fantastic.
So in all honesty, we've been very, very lucky.
You were fantastic from day one,
no,
right?
Yeah, no. Well, in all honesty, our so the team that we have we have Aaron on our team, and then we have Christopher, who's one of our advisors, who's also, one of the best developers he's probably a pretty good developer against the rest of the city, but he's also one of the best product guys in the city. And so we definitely had, a good start from the get-go. I haven't had a horror story quite yet with Price Intelligently, we're just ramping up, hiring a full-time dev right now, or putting the feelers out there to kind of look for someone. I've had some, horror stories with other side projects in the past where I tried to outsource the development, and I didn't do it correctly. So outsourcing development was something that you could do, and when I say outsource, I mean going to India or Eastern Europe. But in all actuality, I didn't approach an outsourced software development deal in the proper manner. I ended up losing cash and not really getting any product to show for it.
Okay, so let me ask you then. So you're looking to hire a developer now. Tell the audience, how would they, if they wanted to work for you, what would they need to do to be the rock star candidate?
They need to know Python or be willing to learn Python. So that's kind of the code base of choice, at least for us right now. And they need to. So kind of going back to just the interview advice that I gave, like for us, I really, really think that they need to fit into our culture. They need to fit into kind of our business goals and our business outlook. And they need to be scrappy. They don't need to know all the answers, but they need to be able to efficiently and effectively get to the answers through different resources at their disposal.
Awesome. Okay, so this is where I'm hoping you guys could jump in and give me some questions. So he's not only a former Googler. I know some of you guys know him, but he's looking to hire a developer. So what questions would you have for someone like him at this point? Just put your hand up, and I'll unmute you guys. You can fire away, ask him any questions. He said at the beginning of the pre-show that there was no question off limits. So go ahead. Anyone? All right, Samuel, go ahead.
Pick this guy.
Pat, with the huge companies in Boston snapping up talent like Amazon, even companies like Vistaprint, Google, and other companies with huge venture-backed funding throwing big offers on the table for top talent, what are you actually bringing to the table or offering to your developers to join you versus taking up a sweet package to go and take a cushy job with the nice benefits?
So in all honesty, I'm not looking for someone who just wants to go get the cushy job with the nice benefits. I want someone who wants the adventure and who wants to take something from nothing, essentially. So I know that's like easy to say, hard to do, but if someone is really, really going to be persuaded by a higher than average salary, good stock options, really, really nice perks at Google, Amazon, or PayPal's now hiring pretty extensively in Boston, or Vistaprint as well. They're not necessarily going to be the right person for us because we're at 5 employees essentially. You're going to be under 10, under the 10th employee, and because of that, you're definitely going to have that scrappy mindset. So I guess that would be my answer to that type of a question, is that that person wouldn't necessarily be the right fit. And how we would compete with, I guess, Amazon if we really, really found someone that we wanted to poach, let's say, or kind of bring them in. I think our culture and our atmosphere really is something that is infectious, and that we can kind of go toe to toe on any bureaucratic large company, Vistaprint included.
Good answer. Good answer. Next, anyone else? Questions? Yeah, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
I was going to say John Gisimando right there in the white T-shirt is the developer. So I was wondering, he had just gone through interview. John just gone through interviews on the West Coast. I was wondering if he had a question based off of that.
Yeah, John, you're not muted. Oh, hold on. Go ahead, John. Can you hear us? Is he frozen now? Try it now, John. Can you hear us? No. Hold on. You mute. No, I didn't want it. I'm trying to unmute you.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, go ahead.
You muted me, but somehow I can unmute myself.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Cool.
It's okay. My question is, how do you go about figuring out if you are talking to a person that doesn't want a cushy job or someone that's going to be super into your opportunity?
So It's just transparency. Like one of the main values we have at Price Intelligently is being really upfront. So if we have an initial conversation and I'll tell you like what the salary range and what where our business is at, and if you are like, oh, that's pretty intense, or that's not for me, I think that really says something about the person. Also, if I start engaging you about the product, and that in the first conversation, early stage business, all we can talk about is the product, our vision, where we're trying to go, and catch on to that energy, and you just oh, and then we can do this, or what about this, or what if we went after that market. That's something that really can get the gears going on our side to say like, oh, this person is very interested in like solving these types of problems, versus this person wants to go to a really large company and have a sweet gig, sweet paycheck and all of those different things, which is perfectly fine. Like, don't get me wrong, I've done both, and I loved both. It just was different for different points in my life.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, John. Okay, any other questions? Because I got a lot. So we had someone just join us. It's getting so slow, it's freezing up on me. But if you have questions, just Paul, if you have questions, just put your hand up, and Patrick will answer it. Okay, Patrick. So the whole education revolution that's going on in the past, you wanted to get a good job as a developer, you needed a computer science engineering degree. Now you have the rise of the hacker schools, Dev Boot Camp, Code Academy, which is now the starter league, is getting lots of press. You have their alumni building great projects, doing great things. What's your take on this? You're hiring a developer. Do you want a developer who has a computer science degree, or do you want someone who had never coded, but 4 months ago they just started and now they have an application that they built in Python? What's more important to you?
Well, the best developers I know didn't go to college. There are a few of them who I know who went and got real formal training in college as well. So that's a really tough question to answer. It really goes back to kind of what we were talking about when John asked his question or Samuel's asked his. More of the cultural fit, and then the aptitude kind of comes in what they've already done, or how they approach problems that we can pose in different questions or different scenarios. So I wouldn't, a bigger company, I would argue it's harder to get into the first interview if you haven't had some history of aptitude within the particular code base or field, or you don't have like a degree in computer science or computer engineering. In a startup, I would say it's definitely a lot of word of mouth and networking, and kind of proving your stuff through things that you've done and shown folks.
Awesome. That really leads us to just current general trends in the development industry. What do you sort of witness going on? What are the trends? What are the changes that are happening now?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question, to be perfectly upfront. But I would say from my perspective, which is kind of, I can speak a little bit of dev language. And before I would hire anyone as a dev, like I would need to confer with my co-founders who are actual devs. I wouldn't be making, the final decision at all. But I would say one of the big trends is that there's hidden pockets of devs I've noticed. So some of the other kind of my mentors throughout Boston that I've talked to about hiring developers, and the whole, oh, it's so hard, to find developers, to find good talent. They've kind of pushed back on that and said it's not necessarily hard to find that talent. It's you're not looking necessarily in the right places. So you have to kind of actively seek a developer. At least that's what I've been told, rather than kind of being apathetic and throwing something on your your jobs page. I know some of the larger startups will say they're not necessarily like startups in the early stage sense, but they go all out. Like HubSpot, for example, like you get a $10,000 referral bonus. Their developers get all kinds of perks. You know, they're able to kind of create a magnet for developer work. But that's kind of the trend that I'm seeing is like, you know, really trying to refine where you're looking for development help. In addition to making sure that you do have some perks that you can offer, whether it's the adventure or if you have the cash, you know, more traditional perks, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Excellent. I have one more question.
Cool.
In your experience, can you tell us about the best coder you've ever worked with? What was his or her 3 qualities that made him or her stand out?
Well, I don't know if I've worked. Okay. Let me just say, like, the best developer from like my limited, yeah, I guess benchmark. Because I've met some like nerdy, real intense folks when I was working at Google who blew me away just in a conversation, and I didn't even know what they worked on. Like, I met the guy who invented the CAPTCHA. Like, I met the guy. I met Vince
You
Cerf.
did a TED Talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that guy worked in the Boston office for a little while, so that was like really cool to be involved with. But I would also say like the best developers I know are like some of the most fun folks I know as well. So I guess that's kind of my experience with them. It's always been a lot of fun, and they've always been like nerdy in the right way. I don't really know how to define that statement, but they've always
Nerdy in the right
been,
way.
yeah, they've always been like quirky. They've been unique, kind of going back to the thesis that I talked about in the first 10 minutes. Like, there's something about them that isn't vanilla. Like, it's not they've saved the world or ran 26 marathons, but they're interesting individuals, I guess, is what I would say.
Good stuff. Kai Gray, did you raise your hand? Did you have a question for Patrick? No? Okay. Anyone else got any more questions? Anyone else, just raise your hand. I can unmute you and you can ask a question. Anyone at all? Is Jonathan Corbin? Anyone else? Okay. So, Patrick, anything else that you wanted to add? I know there was more about pricing intelligently. I was hoping to hear about what stage are you at right now? I know you're hiring a developer. You're just about to scale out. The site looks fantastic. It's done. What other challenges are you facing now?
Really, it's figuring out how to effectively scale like customer acquisition and to a greater extent like our inbound marketing funnel. So we have a lot of best practices that we use that we figured out even in our very very young state. But I think it's getting to a point where we can do double the amount of traffic or double the amount of leads with the same amount of time invested, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we've been getting creative by getting the content right, as you kind of alluded to about that freemium post. I mean, it was on the front page of Hacker News for like 4 hours, which was really good. We got a huge spike in traffic. So figuring out like how to get the content right, and then also figuring out how we can make our product more systematized so it takes less time for people to use and for us to use when we're doing some of these consulting deals. In addition to making our product work for our own marketing acquisition. So something that we recently added is, there's a survey aspect to the product and there's a thank you page. Well, every thank you page, we've now added like a little bit of branding so people can go directly back to our site. And that allows us to kind of, grow when some of these brands are sending out 20,000 of these surveys. We get access to potentially 20,000 new eyeballs of other businesses who are taking these surveys. So that's been huge for us, is just trying to figure out kind of to summarize back again to my point, how we can do more with less, essentially.
Awesome. That's fantastic. We're hitting pretty much an hour here. I really appreciate your time, Patrick. It's been great. We got a lot out of you. Any questions from anyone else before we cap this off? Anyone else? All right. So again, we do this every week, Tuesdays, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For those guests that I have that can't meet that time, I try and do it at a time that's convenient for them and then upload that later. But we're speaking to developers, people who hire developers, people who recruit developers pretty much every week. So again, Patrick, I really appreciate your time. The software is exciting. I love the site. I love the content. I read pretty much the blogs sold me on this interview and why I wanted to do it. So I'm really grateful you gave me a full hour to do it, and you did your homework and you provided some great stuff. I've been trying to land a Google employee for a long time, so I'm excited and I'm really grateful that you did it. I appreciate it very much.
I'm always using that Google card everywhere I go. Former Googler everywhere. No.
That's good stuff. That's great. That's great.
Awesome.
So where can people find you?
Well, I'm pretty sure like everyone on GChat or on the chat right now I know in real life. So, but if
for the 15,000 people who are going to watch the next 6 weeks,
yeah,
how should they contact you?
For the 15,000 people who are going to watch, I would say Paticus is my Twitter handle, Patticus.
Okay.
Or just download our ebook. You'll instantly get emails from me. And if you respond to those emails, I actually respond to those. So you'll be able to contact me through there.
Mm-hmm.
Twitter is really easy to find me. I respond to tweets pretty incessantly, probably to my detriment. But yeah, also download our ebook and then I can respond to those emails.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic. I got a lot out of that. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right, guys. Thanks for all coming in and joining us.
Yeah.
Have a great night.
All right. See you guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.